Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers and sisters, and welcome back to the Islamic SHAHADA channel. In the heart of the Balkans lies Bosnia, a nation where history never fully fades. The call to prayer still echoes over Sarajevo's hills, weaving through Ottoman mosques, Austro-Hungarian avenues, and remnants of Yugoslav architecture. Few places in Europe display such a visible dialogue between civilizations. Islam arrived in Bosnia during the Ottoman expansion of the 15th century, and over the next 500 years, it became deeply rooted in local identity. Ottoman rule introduced new systems of law, education, and urban life, turning cities like Sarajevo and Travnik into centers of scholarship and trade. Even today, their narrow cobbled streets and domed mosques stand as living testimonies to that era. But Bosnia's Islamic heritage is not just an artifact of empire. It remains an active force shaping national consciousness. The Bosniak Muslim community, one of three constituent peoples of the country, continues to play a central role in defining Bosnia's post-war identity. Religion here is inseparable from survival. After centuries of coexistence and after a brutal conflict in the 1990s that targeted Muslims for extermination, faith became a form of endurance. In July 2025, the nation commemorated the 30th anniversary of the Srebrenica genocide, a defining moment in Bosnian history and in the moral memory of Europe. Thousands gathered to honor newly identified victims, reminding the world that the struggle for truth and justice continues. For Bosnian Muslims, remembrance is an act of faith, a way to preserve dignity in the face of denial and revisionism. Yet Bosnia's challenges in 2025 are not only historical. Political instability, fueled by secessionist rhetoric and ethnic polarization, threatens the fragile unity established by the Dayton Peace Agreement. The country's Islamic institutions, led by the Regeset, strive to maintain social cohesion while balancing tradition and modern governance. Externally, Bosnia finds itself at the intersection of competing influences. Turkey continues to invest in mosque restoration and cultural projects, reviving old Ottoman ties. Meanwhile, the European Union urges secular reforms, and Gulf states support religious education programs that sometimes challenge local traditions. These forces reflect a deeper question. Who defines Bosnian Islam in the modern era? The local community, or global powers with different visions of faith? Amid these tensions, a new generation is emerging. Educated, connected, and globally aware, young Bosnians navigate multiple identities: European, Muslim, and post-conflict citizens of a fragile democracy. For them, Islam is not a relic of the past, but a moral compass in uncertain times. Bosnia today stands at a delicate intersection of history and hope. Its mosques still call to prayer as they did 5 centuries ago, but the meaning of that call continues to evolve. From imperial legacy to survival, to the search for peace and purpose in a divided modern world. The Ottoman era left an imprint on Bosnia deeper than in any other part of Europe. 5 centuries of imperial presence transformed not only the country's architecture, but also its rhythms of life. From the sound of the muezzin at dawn to the scent of coffee brewed in copper pots. The evidence is visible everywhere. In Sarajevo's Bashcharshia, the old bazaar founded by Isabeg Ishakovic in the 15th century, merchants still trade beneath wooden eaves designed by Ottoman craftsmen. The Gazi Husrev Beg Mosque, completed in 1531, remains one of the most remarkable architectural works in the Balkans, a structure that has survived empires, bombardments, and reconstruction, yet continues to function as a spiritual and cultural center of the city. Beyond the capital, towns like Travnik, Mostar, and Foča preserve their Ottoman heritage through stone bridges, caravanserais, and madrasas that still operate as schools and museums. In Mostar, the Stari Most, or Old Bridge, destroyed during the war and rebuilt in 2004, stands as a powerful symbol of reconciliation and continuity. It connects not only two riverbanks, but two historical realities: a medieval Christian heritage and an Ottoman Islamic identity. For Bosnia's Muslims, these sites are not relics of empire, but living parts of daily life. Friday prayers, Ramadan processions, and traditional Waqf charities continue to follow Ottoman forms. The Islamic community of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Regeset, preserves a Hanafi interpretation of Islam that reflects centuries of adaptation to local culture, European context, and coexistence with Christian and Jewish neighbors. In 2025, renewed attention to cultural preservation has made Ottoman heritage a key part of Bosnia's soft power and tourism economy. Projects funded by Turkey's TIKA agency and UNESCO continue to restore historic mosques, hammams, and tombs, promoting them as symbols of multicultural coexistence. Yet these same projects also raise debates about cultural sovereignty, whether Bosnia's Islamic identity is being safeguarded or subtly redefined through foreign influence. For younger Bosnians, Ottoman architecture is more than a tourist attraction. It is a visual reminder of belonging to a global Islamic civilization while remaining distinctly European. This duality, Eastern in form, Western in geography, is what gives Bosnia its unique place in the cultural map of Europe. The Ottoman inheritance in Bosnia, therefore, is not frozen in time. It breathes through prayer, trade, education, and art. It gives the country both its historical depth and its spiritual texture, a reminder that Islam in Bosnia is not imported or imposed, but indigenized over centuries of coexistence, learning, and adaptation. 3 decades have passed since the Srebrenica genocide, yet its shadow still defines Bosnia's moral and religious landscape. Between July 11th and 13th, 1995, more than 8,000 Bosniak men and boys were executed by Bosnian Serb forces, in what international courts later recognized as genocide. The massacre became the darkest chapter in Europe's post-World War II history. In July 2025, Bosnia and the world marked the 30th anniversary of that tragedy. Tens of thousands gathered at the Podocari Memorial Center, where the newly identified remains of 86 victims were laid to rest, beside more than 6,700 others already buried there. Religious leaders, survivors, and foreign dignitaries joined in remembrance, reaffirming a collective call for truth and justice. For Bosnia's Muslim community, Srebrenica is not just a wound of history, but a continuing act of faith. The annual prayer service, held beneath rows of white gravestones, blends religious devotion with civic duty. It represents a sacred form of testimony, a refusal to forget, and a demand that the moral lessons of genocide remain part of Europe's conscience. Yet even as Bosnia commemorates, the struggle over memory continues. Denial and revisionism persist among nationalist leaders, particularly in Republika Srpska, where officials still refuse to recognize the events of 1995 as genocide. In 2025, renewed political tensions and disinformation campaigns have reignited public debate, testing Bosnia's fragile social fabric. International attention remains strong. The United Nations and European Parliament reaffirmed their recognition of the genocide in statements leading up to the 30th anniversary. Several European capitals hosted exhibitions and film retrospectives dedicated to survivors' stories, emphasizing remembrance as a universal moral responsibility. For many Bosniaks, Srebrenica symbolizes not only loss, but identity, the moment when survival and faith became inseparable. Families who endured the war continue to link their endurance to spiritual resilience. In mosques, sermons on the anniversary speak of patience, sabr, justice, ADL, and the duty to stand against oppression, values deeply rooted in Islamic ethics. At a national level, the Islamic community of Bosnia and Herzegovina plays a key role in shaping remembrance culture. Through education programs, youth visits to memorial sites, and interfaith dialogues, it promotes a narrative that transcends revenge. focusing instead on reconciliation, moral clarity, and the safeguarding of human dignity. 30 years later, Srebrenica is no longer only a Bosnian tragedy. It is a universal warning about what happens when hate is left unchallenged. And in Bosnia's mosques, every whispered prayer for the victims is also a reminder that faith can be the last refuge of a people when the world turns away. In the years after the war, the reconstruction of mosques and Islamic heritage sites became one of Bosnia's most visible acts of recovery. More than 1,000 mosques were destroyed during the conflict, symbols of identity targeted alongside the people who worshipped in them. Rebuilding them was not just about bricks and minarets, it was about restoring a sense of belonging. From Sarajevo's centuries-old Gazi Husrev Beg Mosque to small village masjids, restoration projects have drawn both local devotion and global attention. International donors from Turkey, the Gulf, and Europe have financed much of the work, blending faith with diplomacy. Each rebuilt mosque stands as a monument to cultural survival, yet also as a reminder of how Bosnia's religious landscape remains connected to wider geopolitical currents. For many Bosniaks, these renewed spaces of prayer are not only places of worship, but also symbols of endurance, evidence that faith, once attacked, can rise again from the ashes of war. In 2025, Bosnia and Herzegovina remains at the intersection of faith and foreign policy. As the country continues rebuilding its cultural and religious landscape, external actors, particularly Turkey, have taken an increasingly visible role. Through large-scale investments, Ankara has positioned itself as both a benefactor and a strategic stakeholder in the revival of Bosnian Islam. Organizations such as the Turkish Cooperation and Coordination Agency, TICA, and the Presidency of Religious Affairs, Diyanet fund mosque reconstruction, educational programs, and cultural initiatives that emphasize shared Ottoman heritage. Projects like the restoration of Ferhadija Mosque in Banja Luka and the expansion of Islamic faculties in Sarajevo illustrate how religious diplomacy is used as a bridge between historical memory and modern influence. For many Bosniaks, Turkish support represents solidarity, a continuation of cultural kinship rooted in centuries of Ottoman presence. However, the growing scale of Turkish involvement has also provoked debate. Some scholars and civic groups express concern that the flow of external funding may introduce conservative interpretations of Islam not traditionally aligned with Bosnia's historically moderate and local Hanafi Sufi tradition. This tension mirrors a broader regional dynamic: Turkey's use of cultural and religious diplomacy as instruments of soft power across the Balkans. Analysts in 2025 note that Ankara's presence is not limited to symbolic gestures. It extends into media, education, and politics, subtly reshaping how Islam is practiced and perceived. Within Bosnia, this influence has sparked discussions about religious independence, identity, and the role of Islam in a secular European state. As Sarajevo navigates its position between East and West, each new mosque or cultural project becomes more than an act of piety. It becomes a marker of alignment in a landscape where faith and geopolitics are deeply intertwined. The Islamic community of Bosnia and Herzegovina, known as the Redefining, continues to play a central role in shaping both the religious and civic dimensions of Bosnian society. Established during the late Ottoman period and restructured after independence, the Redefining remains one of the most organized and autonomous Islamic institutions in Europe, overseeing mosques, religious schools, and Islamic faculties across the country. In 2025, the Redefining's leadership has emphasized moderation, unity, and public responsibility amid a complex political environment. Grand Mufti Hussein Kavazovic and other senior figures frequently address issues of national reconciliation, moral integrity, and social justice, themes that resonate deeply in a society still marked by ethnic division and post-war trauma. Their public sermons and statements often call for patience, civic participation, and resistance against nationalism or imported religious extremism. Beyond religious guidance, the Regiset also engages in education and social outreach. It manages Islamic studies programs in universities, coordinates humanitarian aid for marginalized communities, and supports interfaith dialogue with Catholic and Orthodox leaders. During periods of political tension, such as debates on constitutional reform and governance deadlock, the institution often serves as a stabilizing moral voice, advocating for dialogue and mutual respect. However, the Regiset's authority also faces new generational and ideological pressures. Younger Muslims, shaped by digital media and global ideas, sometimes question traditional hierarchies or seek alternative expressions of spirituality. Meanwhile, some civic groups argue that the Regiset must modernize its outreach to remain relevant in an increasingly secular urban environment. Despite these challenges, the Regiset's consistent advocacy for moderate European Islam stands as a defining feature of Bosnia's identity. Its careful balance between faith and civic duty, between history and modernity, ensures that Islam in Bosnia remains both deeply rooted and publicly engaged, offering a model of religious leadership rare in today's Europe. Between 2012 and 2016, several hundred Bosnian citizens left the country to join armed groups in Syria and Iraq, a phenomenon that, though numerically small, had a lasting impact on Bosnia's international image and domestic security discourse. In the years since, the Bosnian government, international partners, and religious authorities have worked to monitor and mitigate the risks associated with returnees and potential radical networks. By 2024 to 2025, security agencies continue to list foreign fighter returnees and online radicalization as active but manageable concerns. According to the latest government and EU reports, the number of returnees is limited, and most are under formal judicial supervision or integrated into rehabilitation and reintegration programs. The State Investigation and Protection Agency, SIPA, and regional counterterrorism units cooperate closely with Europol and Interpol to track cross-border movement and financial channels linked to extremist activities. Local analysts stress that the risk of violent extremism is low but persistent, shifting from organized cells to more fragmented online-based influences. Radical preachers and small networks that once operated in isolated rural communities, particularly around northern Bosnia, have largely diminished following coordinated law enforcement and community interventions. Crucially, Bosnia's Islamic community, Regiset, plays a preventive role. Through Friday sermons, public education, and close collaboration with the Ministry of Security, it promotes de-radicalization efforts grounded in traditional Bosnian Islam, a moderate Hanafi Sufi tradition that rejects imported extremist ideologies. These community-based initiatives emphasize dialogue, reintegration, and psychological support rather than punitive isolation. While terrorist incidents remain extremely rare, the continued focus on prevention reflects a broader European concern: how to balance vigilance with inclusion. Bosnia's approach in 2025, combining law enforcement with religious and civic engagement, is seen by international observers as a model of post-conflict resilience, addressing security without alienating faith. In 2025, Bosnia and Herzegovina remains a state defined by both its fragile peace and its complex power-sharing arrangement. The country's Dayton constitutional framework, created to end the 1992 to 1995 war, still divides political authority along ethnic lines among Bosniaks, Croats, and Serbs, a system that was meant to preserve coexistence but now often obstructs governance. Recent developments have reignited anxiety about the country's future. Leaders of Republika Srpska, one of Bosnia's two administrative entities, have again raised the threat of secession, defying the authority of state-level institutions and international agreements. The rhetoric of separatism, combined with escalating disputes over election laws and judicial authority, has deepened political paralysis in Sarajevo and heightened fears of renewed instability. For Bosniak Muslims, these tensions carry more than symbolic weight. The memory of ethnic cleansing and genocide in the 1990s remains vivid and calls for partition or state fragmentation reopen old wounds. Civil society groups and survivors' associations warn that the denial of the Srebrenica genocide, which persists in some political circles, undermines reconciliation and fuels mistrust among communities. In this climate, religion and identity become deeply intertwined with politics. The Islamic community, Redefining, and Bosniak political leaders consistently advocate for territorial integrity, equal citizenship, and protection of minority rights as essential to preserving Bosnia's multi-confessional character. International organizations, including the EU, UN, and Genocide Watch, have issued repeated statements urging restraint and adherence to the Dayton Peace Accords, viewing Bosnia's unity as a test case for the future of pluralism in the Balkans. Despite polarization, ordinary Bosnians continue to express a desire for stability and coexistence, yet the persistence of nationalist rhetoric and external interference from regional powers and global actors threatens to erode that fragile consensus. In 2025, Bosnia stands once again at a crossroads between the promise of shared citizenship and the peril of ethnic fragmentation. Beyond politics and institutions, the everyday reality of Islam in Bosnia is defined by diversity and adaptation. In Sarajevo, Tuzla, and Mostar, the sound of the adhan blends naturally with cafe culture, student debates, and modern art exhibitions. Islam here is not monolithic. It lives in families, in street corners, and in the rhythm of public life. Among the younger generation, Islam is often viewed less as a collective ideology and more as a personal compass. Many young Bosniaks describe their faith as a moral and emotional anchor amid uncertainty, a framework for meaning rather than a political statement. Some embrace visible religious identity through hijab, community volunteering, or Quranic study circles. Others engage with Islam privately, integrating it with global youth culture, music, and digital expression. In urban centers, Muslim youth organizations and NGOs have emerged as key actors in promoting interfaith cooperation and civic dialogue. Projects such as joint memorial events in Srebrenica or workshops on social responsibility bring together Muslims, Catholics, and Orthodox Christians, reinforcing Bosnia's pluralistic heritage. Meanwhile, Islamic scholars and educators are experimenting with new ways to communicate faith through podcasts, cultural festivals, and online platforms, aiming to keep religion relevant in a rapidly changing society. In rural areas, traditions remain strong. Communal iftars during Ramadan, Sufi dhikr gatherings, and local mosque networks preserve a sense of continuity with the past. These practices sustain what many call Bosnian Islam, a spiritual culture rooted in tolerance, poetry, and family life, far removed from extremist narratives imported from abroad. By 2025, this mosaic of lived Islam reflects Bosnia's broader struggle for equilibrium between faith and modernity, memory and aspiration. It is a reminder that in the heart of the Balkans, Islam is not merely a historical legacy. It is a living culture, evolving quietly within the pulse of everyday life. As Bosnia and Herzegovina moves through 2025, the future of its Islamic identity, and indeed of its social fabric, depends on how the nation navigates a series of interlinked challenges. First, the memory of the 1990s war remains a defining moral and political issue. Education systems, memorial culture, and legal accountability for war crimes continue to shape how new generations understand the past. The 30th anniversary of the Srebrenica genocide in July 2025 reignited debate over denial, justice, and the ethics of remembrance. Whether Bosnia can transform trauma into a shared narrative of dignity and resilience will profoundly affect interethnic trust and national cohesion. Second, external religious influence remains a double-edged force. While funding from Turkey, Gulf countries, and international NGOs has aided reconstruction and education, it also raises questions about autonomy and ideological orientation. The ability of Bosnia's Islamic community, Redefining, to preserve a distinct, locally rooted interpretation of Islam, moderate, European, and inclusive, will determine whether faith continues to serve as a bridge or becomes a boundary. Third, security and civil rights must be kept in careful balance. Bosnia's experience with foreign fighters and radicalization has made prevention a national priority. Yet, as experts note, over-securitization risks alienating communities. The country's most effective responses have come not from surveillance, but from dialogue, education, and the moral leadership of local imams and teachers. Finally, the enduring question is coexistence. Bosnia's identity, as a meeting point of Islam, Orthodoxy, and Catholicism, remains under pressure from nationalist politics and regional rivalries. Preserving this pluralism requires more than political agreements. It demands social investment, empathy, and consistent leadership committed to a shared future. In the end, Bosnia's path forward depends on whether it can hold together these competing forces: memory and reconciliation, tradition and modernity, faith and democracy. Its Ottoman-derived Islamic heritage will either continue as a source of cultural pluralism and moral strength, or, if politicized, risk becoming another fault line in a nation still healing from its past. Islam in Bosnia is not a relic of history, nor merely a reminder of the Ottoman centuries that once shaped the Balkans. It is a living tradition, fragile yet enduring, constantly reinterpreted by those who carry it forward. From the domes of Sarajevo's Gazi Husrev Beg Mosque to the quiet prayer rooms of post-war villages, faith here continues to evolve, shaped by both remembrance and reinvention. The legacy of the past is impossible to escape. The war of the 1990s left deep wounds, and the names of Srebrenica, Prijedor, and Foča still echo through collective memory. Yet, 3 decades later, the endurance of Bosnian Islam reflects something greater than survival. It reflects resilience, dignity, and the refusal to let violence define identity. In 2025, that same faith faces new trials: the politics of division, the weight of foreign influence, and the generational drift towards secular modernity. Each challenge tests not only institutions but also the quiet conviction of individuals, students, families, and imams who seek to reconcile belief with belonging in an uncertain Europe. And still, every dawn, the call to prayer rises above Sarajevo's hills, over synagogues, churches, and war memorials, a sound that has survived empire, genocide, and reconstruction. It reminds the world that Bosnia's story is not one of conflict alone, but of continuity and coexistence. In the heart of the Balkans, Islam endures not through power, but through patience, not through conquest, but through character. Its survival is not a return to the past, but a dialogue with the future. A faith carried forward by memory, shaped by struggle, and defined by hope. Thanks for watching until the end. I hope it was useful. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.